The house in Glendale looked softer in the late afternoon light than it was ever felt when I was actually inside it. The stucco walls held onto the sun like they did every summer, glowing a washed-out warm color that never quite made it too cozy. The front yard was clipped and tidy, the hedges trimmed so neatly they looked measured, not grown. I sat in my car at the curb with the engine off and my hands wrapped around the steering wheel, watching a small breeze shiver through the jacaranda tree by the sidewalk. The purple blossoms had already fallen, leaving a faint stain on the concrete, as if the color had tried its best to stay and finally gave up. I had not seen my parents in a few weeks. I had convinced myself that this visit would be easy. I would walk in, make some joke about how Chloe was probably drowning in last-minute wedding details, and we would all circle around her like we always did, orbiting the younger daughter, whose life seemed to matter more than anyone else's. It was supposed to be wedding week. I had taken time off work. I had tried to feel excited. I opened the car door and stepped out, the familiar scent of sun-warmed concrete and distant cut grass rising around me. My shoes made soft taps against the walkway as I approached the front door. The same welcome mat with the worn-out letters. The same porch light Dad always promised to fix properly and never did. I lifted my hand and knocked. 3 soft raps that sounded too polite, even to my own ears. For a heartbeat, I wanted to turn around and leave before anyone answered, to postpone whatever was waiting on the other side of that door. But the handle clicked, and the decision was made for me. Mom pulled the door open, her face lit by a practiced smile that did not quite reach the corners of her eyes. "There you are," she said, and stepped aside before I could respond. I slipped past her into the living room and smelled coffee and something like canned soup. The television murmured in the background, some old sitcom Dad always left on as company. He sat in his recliner, in the same position I had seen him in 1,000 times, remote in hand, eyes on the screen. He glanced up just long enough to acknowledge me with a slight nod, the kind reserved for neighbors or co-workers, not a daughter who had driven all the way across the city to see him. Chloe was at the dining table, phone in one hand, a nail file in the other. She was wearing a soft white top that made her tan skin look warmer, and her hair was pulled into a loose bun that managed to appear casual and intentional at the same time. There was something different in the way she was sitting, a kind of settled satisfaction that made the room feel slightly tilted. I set my bag down by the doorway, forcing a cheerful tone into my voice as I said that I could not believe the big day was almost here, that I wanted to hear about the final plans, that I had even found my dress already. Chloe did not stand up. She did not smile wider. She glanced at me, a quick up and down that felt like assessment, not greeting. And then she said that the wedding was last week. She flicked a bit of imaginary dust from her thumbnail and added that only the real family had been invited. She said it like she was commenting on the weather. No edge in her voice, no apology, no bravado. Just a flat statement of fact that landed in the center of the room and sat there between us. For a second, I thought I had heard her wrong. I remember blinking, my mind scrambling to rearrange the words into something less cruel. Maybe she meant a rehearsal dinner. Maybe a legal ceremony at the courthouse. Maybe she was joking in that dry way people sometimes misjudge. I looked at Mom, waiting for her to protest, to say, "Chloe, stop. That is not funny." Mom moved toward the kitchen instead, her gaze sliding past me like I was a piece of furniture. Doc kept his eyes on the television. His jaw tightened once, almost imperceptibly, but he did not say a word. The laugh track from the show rolled over us, wildly out of place. I stood there with my fingertips pressed into the strap of my bag, meaning to ask how, meaning to ask why, meaning to say anything at all. The questions rose and then stalled. I could feel them gathering in my throat like stones. My chest felt both heavy and strangely hollow. There was no scene, no shouting, no demand for explanation, just the quiet realization that a door had closed without me even knowing. There had been a choice. I heard Mom ask Chloe if she wanted tea. I heard Dad shift in his chair. I heard my own heartbeat in my ears. The word family kept echoing, each repetition smaller and sharper than the last. I picked up my bag again because I did not know what else to do with my hands. I told Mom I had just remembered something I needed to take care of. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. She made a vague sound of acknowledgement without turning fully toward me. There was no come sit, no stay for dinner, no wait, let us talk about this. I walked back to the front door, opened it myself, and stepped out into the bright Glendale afternoon. The air felt too clean out there, too wide after the tightness of the living room. As I pulled the door closed behind me, I realized I was holding my breath. I do not know what you are doing right now as you listen to this. For me, I was sitting in my car outside that house, trying to understand what had just happened. If this moment feels familiar to you in any way, you are welcome to share your thoughts. I would love to read them. I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door, shutting out the sound of a lawnmower somewhere down the block. My fingers trembled only slightly as I put the key in the ignition. I did not cry. The tears stayed lodged behind my eyes like they were waiting for permission that I was not ready to give. I pulled away from the curb slowly, the familiar streets of my childhood drifting past my windows almost unrecognizable. The grocery store where Mom used to take us on Saturdays, the park where Dad had sat on the bench while Chloe and I ran through. Sprinklers. Little memories surfaced with each corner, and each one felt like it belonged to someone else now. Another family that had not yet decided who counted and who did not. The drive back to my place passed in fragments. A red light here, a lane change there. The steady hum of the engine filling the silence I could not bring myself to break. My phone buzzed once in my bag, then again. I did not reach for it. I did not want to see a message from Mom making small talk, or from Chloe, pretending nothing had happened. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex and sat there with the engine off, hands still resting on the steering wheel. The sky was beginning to slide toward evening, softening at the edges. For a long minute, I just watched the light change on the building across from mine. A strange calm settling over the shock like a thin layer of ice. Eventually, I reached for my phone, not because I wanted to hear from them, but because I knew another source would be talking. If there had been a wedding, someone would have posted about it. Cole lived online as much as she lived in reality. She curated her life in squares and stories and filtered captions. And if she had truly married without me, that fact would be frozen in pixels somewhere. But when I opened her page, the newest post was over a week old. Some sponsored thing about skincare that suddenly felt laughable. No wedding photos, no subtle hints, no coded messages. Just ordinary noise. I felt a flicker of confusion, then remembered my cousin. Liv posted everything. Holidays, meals, bad hair days. All of it made its way onto her feed, sooner or later. Liv would not have skipped a wedding, especially not Chloe's. I typed her name into the search bar and tapped the little circle with her smiling face. Her page opened, and there it was. A cluster of images from a date that made my stomach drop a little further. The wedding that I had just been told about last week was right there in front of me. At first glance, it did not look like a wedding at all. It looked like a birthday party in a rented hall somebody had decorated in a hurry. Cheap balloons in muted pastel colors drooped along the back wall. They were tied together in an uneven arc that tried to mimic those perfect balloon garlands you see in magazines, but missed the mark by more than a little. The tables were covered in thin plastic tablecloths that did not quite reach the floor. There were no flowers that I could see, no centerpieces, no arch, no sign announcing the happy couple. Just folding chairs pushed toward the edges of the room, and a scattering of people standing with paper cups in their hands. In one photo, Chloe stood near a long table with a narrow rectangular cake and a few trays of finger food. She was wearing white, that much was true. But the dress looked like something you might order at the last minute for a work party, not the garment she used to describe in dreamy detail when we were younger. Her hair was pulled half up, half down, no veil, no delicate touches, just a practical style that would not get in the way. There was a man beside her, his arm around her waist, his smile focused on the camera. I studied his face, trying to place him, but nothing clicked. Mom had never given me a name. Chloe had never shown me a picture. This stranger in an ill-fitting suit might as well have been a stand-in. Another picture showed a cluster of relatives gathered around Chloe and the man. A few of them held envelopes. In the next shot, those envelopes had disappeared, and I could see them stacked at the far end of the cake table, partially hidden behind a punch bowl. Someone's hand was already reaching to scoop them all together. The body attached to it turned away from the lens. The movement looked quick, almost urgent. like the envelopes needed to be claimed as fast as they appeared. The details snagged at something in the back of my mind. I swiped again and read the caption that Liv had written. Chloe said she wanted a minimalist wedding, intimate and simple. Just family. It had little heart symbols and a string of well wishes in the comments. People called the party classy and understated. They praised the idea of avoiding big, expensive celebrations. They said things like, "Love is what matters," and "This is so you." On the surface, it all made sense. Chloe had always talked about hating fun, but as I looked at those photos a second time, then a third, a different feeling grew in my chest. This did not look minimalist in the way she used to describe, all clean lines and thoughtful choices. It looked stripped, bare bones, like someone had cut away anything that cost more than a little and hoped no one would notice the gap. The room was not charming. It was functional. The decorations were not curated. They were whatever could be grabbed quickly and cheaply. I could almost hear the echo in that hall through the images, the way sound bounces off walls when the space is too large and too empty for the number of people inside. My eyes drifted to the date stamp on the post. It did not match the date printed on the pale cardstock invitation that had been sitting on my kitchen counter for weeks, the one I had propped up against a small plant so I would see it every morning and smile. That invitation had promised a different day, a different time, a different possibility. Somewhere between that neat script and these sagging balloons, the plan had changed, and no one had thought it worth mentioning to me. I sat back against my pillows with the phone still in my hand, staring at the ceiling as the pieces slowly arranged themselves into a shape. I did not like. The party in those pictures was not minimalist out of style. It was minimal because something else was going on. The quick hands gathering envelopes, the plain dress, the bare room, the shifted timeline, the way Chloe had used the phrase, "only real family," like it was an umbrella. Term that somehow left me standing in the rain. I did not yet know what was being hidden or why. I only knew that this shabby little celebration did not fit the story I had been told. It was not about taste or personality. There was a tension in it that I could feel even through a screen, a sense of hurry, of corners cut, of things done just enough to appear a certain way from the outside. And sitting there in my small Glendale apartment with the sun sliding down the wall and my chest tight with unanswered questions, I felt the first real flicker of suspicion. Something about this wedding was wrong, and whatever it was, I had a sinking feeling that it had very little to do with me not being invited, and everything to do with what Chloe and my family were so determined to keep out of sight. And whether I wanted to or not, I knew I was going to start pulling. The knocking came a few hours later. At 6 a.m., it was still dark outside, that thin blue-gray that settles over the world just before sunrise. I was half dreaming when the sound cut through my sleep, sharp and urgent, rattling my front door like someone was trying to knock their way through it. For a split second, I did not know where I was. Then the second round of pounding came, louder, faster, following by Chloe's voice calling my name in a way that snapped me fully awake. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and saw 6:01 in the morning on the screen. My heart was already racing as I swung my feet onto the floor and hurried down in the hall. I hardly had time to turn the lock before the door pushed inward. Chloe nearly stumbled into me. Her face was streaked with tears, her hair tangled, as if she had dragged her hands through it over and over again. Mom stood just behind her, clutching a crumpled tissue, eyes red and unfocused. Dad was a step back in the hallway, rigid, pale, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. "Miles is gone," Chloe sobbed before I could say a word. The phrase did not land right away. "Gone how?" I asked automatically, my mind reaching for something small and fixable. Gone meaning at work too early. Gone meaning out on a walk. Gone meaning delayed. She shook her head hard. Gone. His phone is off. His things are gone. He is just gone." Mom started crying again. Soft, broken sounds that made my stomach twist. David finally spoke, his voice rough and strained. "We cannot find him anywhere. Something is wrong." I stepped aside and let them in, closing the door behind them as the morning air slipped away. Chloe began pacing immediately, back and forth across the living room rug, wiping her face with the sleeve of her jacket. Mom sat on the edge of the couch and pressed the tissue to her mouth. David remained standing near the door like he was guarding it. I asked when they had last seen Miles. "Last night," Chloe said. "We came back here after dinner at Mom and Dad's. Everything was normal. We watched television. I went to bed early because I was exhausted. When I woke up, he was not there. I thought maybe he had stepped out. Then I saw his things were gone." "What things?" I asked. "His valise. The small one. Some clothes, his wallet, his watch, his phone charger. All gone." She took a shuddering breath. "I tried calling him. It goes straight to voicemail." David said they had already driven past Miles's job. His car was not there. They had checked the surrounding streets. Nothing. I felt that quiet internal switch flip inside me again, the one that turns fear into questions. I told them we needed to see the bank accounts. Chloe nodded immediately and said she already had. That was when her voice broke all over again. "The money is gone, Avery. All of it." That landed harder than the disappearance itself. We drove back to my parents' house together in heavy silence. Morning traffic was just beginning to build, ordinary life moving around us, without any idea that ours had cracked wide open. The sun climbed slowly over the rooftops as we pulled into the driveway. Everything looked painfully normal. Inside, Chloe went straight to her old bedroom where she had been staying. Her laptop sat open on the desk. I took the chair and pulled it closer. The joint checking account balance was low, not zero, but close enough to make my chest tighten. I scrolled through the transactions slowly, line by line. Grocery charges, gas, takeout, then larger withdrawals, internal transfers, and finally, one that stood out like a bruise. International transfer, completed at 3:17 in the morning. The amount matched almost everything they had. Saving, gifts, whatever remained after normal expenses. It was clean and final. Chloe leaned over my shoulder and let out a strangled sound when she saw it. That has to be a mistake. It has to be a glitch. I checked her email. There was an alert. Same timestamp. Same amount. No reversal notice. No pending status. It had already cleared. Dad ran a hand through his hair. "That means he took everything." Mom whispered, "Oh, God." I asked about the wedding gifts. Chloe said they had kept them in a white box near her dresser. When she checked this morning, the box was gone. Every envelope went with it, including mine. No one had mentioned that detail yet. I felt it drop silently into place. Dad asked what they should do. Should they call the police now? Should they wait? Should they go looking for him? Mom was shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. I gave them the only grounded answer I had. They could report him missing if they wanted, but an adult is allowed to leave. The money was another matter, but even that would depend on what the bank could freeze and what was already out of reach. Chloe kept insisting there had to be some misunderstanding. Miles loved her. He would never just disappear. She kept saying his name like it might summon him back. There was one question I had not yet asked. It had been growing heavier in my chest with every new detail. "Have you actually filed the marriage license?" I asked quietly. The room stilled. Chloe blinked at me like the question had caught her off guard. "We signed it," she said slowly. "At the county office. Before the ceremony." "Did you receive a certificate after?" I asked. She hesitated. "He said he would file it. He said it takes time to process." "I assumed it would come later." "So you do not know for sure that it was ever submitted," I said. Her mouth opened, then closed. Mom made a small sound like she was about to protest. David looked from Chloe to me and back again. "I do not know," Chloe whispered. I thought he took care of it. Something hard and cold settled into my stomach. The cheap room, the rushed celebration, the fast-gathered envelopes. Now this. The shape of it was sharpening. Dad began pacing again. "If they are not legally married," he said, his voice rising, "then what does that mean?" "It means this may not have been a marriage at all," I said carefully. "At least, Not on paper. Chloe sank onto the bed and covered her face with both hands. No one spoke for a long moment. In my head, the pieces slid together quietly and decisively. This was not panic. This was preparation. Miles had planned his exit. He had money ready to move. He had the smallest amount of legal attachment possible. He had chosen timing carefully. The wedding that had felt wrong from the outside now made sense in the worst way. Mom sat beside Chloe and stroked her hair, whispering that everything would be okay, even though none of us believed it. David swore under his breath and said he would find him. Chloe kept repeating that he had promised her forever. I did not tell them what I was thinking. Not yet. They were still in shock. They were still clinging to the idea that this was confusion, not betrayal. But as I sat there in my parents' house, watching daylight fill the same living room where Chloe had dismissed me the night before, I knew something they did not yet understand. This wedding had never been real, and Miles had never intended to stay. That thought sat with me for the rest of the day like a stone in my pocket. I could ignore it for a few minutes at a time, get up to make coffee, answer a work email, stare out the window at nothing in particular, but every time my attention drifted, there it was again, heavy and solid and impossible to pretend away. By late afternoon, I knew I needed to talk to someone who is not related to me. Someone who did not already have a history with Chloe or Dad or the house in Glendale. Someone who could look at all of this without the layer of old wounds and loyalties. For me, that person was Tessa. We met years ago at a training seminar and became the kind of friends who could go months without seeing each other and then pick up as if we had been, talking every day. Tessa was sharp and funny and had survived enough of her own heartbreaks to know when to listen and when to call something what it was. I called her and asked if she could come over. She heard something in my voice and did not ask many questions. She just said she would be there within an hour. When she arrived, she had her hair pulled back, a large tote bag over one shoulder, and that look she gets when she knows something serious is happening. She hugged me a little longer than usual in the doorway, and then followed me into the living room. "All right," she said as she set her bag down and sank into the corner of the couch. "Tell me everything." I started with Chloe at my door that morning. The empty bed, the missing valise, the drained bank accounts. The international transfer at 3 a.m, the way Chloe had looked when she realized she was not sure if her marriage was even legal. As I spoke, Tessa's expression shifted from concern to anger to that tight focus she gets when she is fitting pieces together in her mind. When I finally ran out of words, the room went quiet for a moment. The afternoon light had started to thin, leaving the corners of the room in soft shadow. I picked up my phone and opened the social media app. I told Tessa I wanted her to see something. I pulled up the video that Liv had posted from the wedding, the one I had not had the stomach to watch closely the night before, and hit play. The video began with a slow pan across the shabby little hall. A few relatives raised their cups and waved toward the camera. The balloon arch sagged in one corner. The music in the background was tinny, like it was coming from a small speaker placed too far away. The camera turned toward Chloe and Miles standing by the table with the cake. Chloe lifted her hands in a little wave, smiling in that self-conscious way she had when she knew people were looking at her. Miles stood beside her with one hand at the small of her back. "Watch him," I said quietly. As the guests moved closer, a few aunts and cousins stepped into frame holding envelopes. One by one, they extended them toward Chloe and Miles. Chloe took a few and laid them on the table in front of her. Then Miles reached out, his motions quick and smooth, and began sliding each envelope into a small paper bag on his other side. It could have been nothing more than tidying up, but the speed of it caught my attention. He barely glanced at the names on the front. The bag disappeared behind the cake stand, just out of frame, as if he had practiced the movement. Tessa leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. "Play it again," she said. I restarted the video. We watched the same moments, slower this time. The reaching hands, the envelopes. Miles's quick fingers tuck each one away. His smile did not falter. He looked relaxed, almost casual, but his eyes were not on Chloe or the guests. They flicked down to the envelopes and back up again with precise rhythm, like someone counting silently. You see it? I asked. He is sweeping the cash, Tessa said flatly. Not rude, not obvious, but fast. Like he wants it out of sight the second it appears. I nodded. I remembered Chloe mentioning the gift box that was later missing. Thinking about that now, I wondered how many times the envelopes had been moved. How many opportunities there had been for Miles to control exactly where they ended up. Tessa reached for my phone and paused the video on a frame where Miles's hand was halfway to the paper bag. His eyes were on the envelope, his mouth still stretched in that practiced smile. He looks like he is working, she said. Not celebrating. Working. I sat back and let my head rest against the couch cushion. The room felt warmer than it had a moment ago. Do you remember, I said slowly, when Chloe first started talking about this wedding? Tessa nodded. She remembered my uncertain voice on the phone months ago. The way I had said that Chloe wanted something very small, very simple, maybe even too simple. She told me, I said, that Miles wanted a stripped-down ceremony. No big expenses, no extras. She repeated it enough times that it started to sound like a slogan. He says big weddings are just a waste. That was how she put it. Tessa tilted her head. That did not sound like the Chloe she remembered meeting at my office holiday party years ago, the girl who had spent the entire evening complimenting other women's dresses and talking about centerpieces. I felt a hollow little laugh escape me. She said real couples invest their money, not spend it on flowers, I added. She said it like it was a quote she had memorized. At the time, I just thought she had been reading some new kind of advice. But today, sitting in their house, it hit me. Those were his words, not hers. I could see it now, the way Chloe had looked when she said those phrases. A little stiff, like she was wearing a dress that did not quite fit. She had always loved details, little touches. The idea that she would suddenly decide she did not care about any of it, that she would call it all a waste, had not quite sat right. I had ignored that feeling because I wanted to be supportive. He reframed cheap as wise, I said quietly. Simple as smart. Like avoiding a fuller wedding made them a better couple than everyone else. Financially sophisticated, Tessa added dryly. Exactly, I said. He turned frugality into virtue to justify cutting corners, and now all that money is gone. We sat with that for a moment. The television was off. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional car passing outside. There is something else, I said. I walked to the small desk against the wall where I had dropped my bag, pull out a folded piece of paper, and brought it back to the couch. It was a printout. I had asked Chloe earlier if I could access her email to see what the bank had sent. In the process, I noticed a message that did not fit. I had printed it without telling her yet, needing time to look at it through clearer eyes. This came from Miles, I said, handing it to Tessa, sent to an address I did not recognize, a few days before the wedding. Tessa unfolded the paper and scanned the text. The email was short. No greeting, no explanation, just one neat sentence and a line of numbers. The sender address was Miles's account. The recipient was a simple name at some financial service I had never heard of. The subject line promised a transfer soon. The body of the message stated that funds would be ready after the event, and then listed an estimated amount. After the event, Tessa murmured, "Not after the wedding," I said. After the event, like he was talking about a work thing. She read it again, more slowly, her brow furrowed. "This looks like he was arranging something," she said. He had already decided that money would be available as soon as the envelopes came in. The numbers listed were not exact, but close enough to what Chloe had expected from gifts and modest savings that the intention was obvious. There was nothing about rent or bills or shared future plans. It was phrased like a man informing a partner that a pot of money would soon become accessible. I had not shown this to Mom or Dad yet. They were still dealing with the shock of Miles being gone and the bank, accounts being empty. I knew that showing them a cold little message like this would turn grief into rage. I needed to understand it myself first. He was never looking at that money as marital property, I said. It was a pool of funds to be collected, then moved. Wedding gifts, saving, our family's generosity, all reduced to a line in an email. A pot to skim, Tessa said softly. I looked back at my phone, now silent on the coffee table. In my mind, I saw Miles again in that video, his hand sliding each envelope into the bag. The smile. They practiced with ease. The bare room he had helped pick so that no one would ask where the money went, because there had been no large visible expense to justify it. He planned all of this, I said. The cheap haul, no flowers, the minimal everything. He made it sound smart so that Chloe would believe it, so that my parents would nod along and say it was practical. The whole point was to keep costs down, so that the envelope stayed full. Tessa set the printout on her knee and tapped it lightly with one finger. Maximize intake, minimize outflow, she said. That is how you would describe it at work. I felt something inside me harden, not just anger now, but a kind of grim clarity. He convinced her that wanting beauty was silly, I said. That investment in a nice venue or flowers was shallow. That real love did not care about those things. And all the while, he knew he was leaving. He wanted every dollar. I thought about Chloe repeating those lines, about real couples who invest instead of spending on flowers. She had sounded proud when she said it, like she believed it made her part of some wiser group. Now it sounded like the echo of a man who had been grooming her to accept less, so he could walk away with more. Tessa looked up at me, her eyes gentle but steady. This is not on you, she said. You gave that gift in good faith. You trusted her. You trusted them. That is what people are supposed to be able to do at a wedding. I nodded, but my throat felt tight. The betrayal sat in layers. Miles had used Chloe. Chloe had shut me out. Maybe because she had been so deeply under his influence, she did not want any questions. My parents had gone along with it, probably relieved that someone else was steering the ship for once, and I had been left standing outside, literally and figuratively, trying to make sense of a wedding that felt like an afterthought. I looked at the printout again. The word funds would be ready after the event seemed to glow on the page. For him, I said slowly, that day was never a wedding. It was an event, an extraction, a scheduled moment when a certain amount of money would become available to him. Everything else was decoration. Cheap decoration, Tessa muttered, on purpose. I leaned back and let my head rest against the couch. My body suddenly felt very tired. The worst part, I said, is that she still loves him. She is sitting at that house in Glendale right now, waiting for a call, thinking maybe something terrible happened to him on the way to the airport, or the bank, or wherever she thinks he is. She keeps saying he would not do this. She does not see what we are seeing. Not yet, Tessa said. I closed my eyes for a moment and pictured Chloe's face that morning. The panic, the confusion, the refusal to believe. He made her complicit without her even knowing, I said. He got her to repeat his lines, defend his choices, sell his story to our parents. So when he left, he could make it look like they had been in it together. Tessa was quiet for a long beat. He is not the first man to dress selfishness up as wisdom, she said eventually. But what he did with that email, with this wedding, that is another level. I folded the paper carefully and set it on the table. I do not know yet what I am going to do with this, I said, or what exactly I will tell Chloe. But at least now I understand something I did not before. What is that? Tessa asked. This was never about a simple wedding, I said. It was a simple heist. He just used the word love to make everyone hand him the money with a smile. Outside, the sky over Glendale had turned a deeper blue. Streetlights flickered one by one. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Then another answered. The ordinary sounds of evening settled around my little condo. Inside, on my coffee table, an email sat between us on a single sheet of paper, and I knew we had just taken our first real step into whatever this was going to become. That night stretched on longer than it should have. Tessa eventually left when the sky had fully darkened and the streetlights outside my window had settled into their steady glow. I cleaned the kitchen in slow, distracted motions, washed the same mug twice without realizing it, and finally sat on the edge of my bed with my phone in my hands. I expected another message from Chloe, another panicked question, another update that led nowhere. The screen stayed quiet. For the first time since all of this began, the silence felt heavier than the noise. I slept in broken pieces and woke up already tired. By mid-morning, my parents had called again. Dad said everyone needed to meet at the house. There were things we had to talk about. His voice had the careful firmness he used when he wanted to sound in control, even if he was not. I drove back to Glendale with my jaw tight and my thoughts crowded. When I arrived, the living room was full. Chloe sat curled into the corner of the couch with a blanket around her shoulders, even though the house was warm. Mom hovered near the kitchen entrance, hands twisting together. Dad stood near the window with his arms folded. The air felt charged, like a storm building with no rain yet. As soon as I stepped inside, Mom rushed over and wrapped her arms around me. I returned the hug stiffly. Chloe looked up with red, swollen eyes but did not speak. "We are all in this together now," Mom said quickly. "We have to help each other." David cleared his throat. He told me to sit down. His tone made it sound less like a request and more like an instruction. Once I was seated, he began talking in a rush. He said that Miles had emptied more than just Chloe's account. He said that they had trusted him, that they had listened when he spoke about smart money moves and modern investing. What had seemed like cautious planning now looked like manipulation. Then he told me about the loans. First, he admitted that they had taken out a home equity line of credit on the house. $95,000. He said it in one breath, like if he spoke it too slowly, he might not be able to finish. He said Miles had explained it as a temporary move, a way to free up liquid funds for a short-term opportunity that would pay back quickly, with interest. Then Mom spoke up in a thin, shaking voice and said that they had also moved, part of their retirement fund. $180,000. She said it had been sitting unused, that they had wanted to grow it, that Miles had promised it would be safe. She kept using the word pool, as if that made it less personal. An investment pool, a shared pot, a family decision. The room went very quiet. I felt something drop straight through my chest and land somewhere deep and painful. $95,000 from their home, $180,000 from their retirement. Numbers that were not just scary. Numbers that could break a life in slow, devastating ways. "Why?" I asked quietly. "Why did you do that?" Dad looked away. "Because he sounded confident," Mom whispered. "Because he talked like he knew what he was doing. Because we wanted to help Chloe start strong. He is my future son-in-law, so he is our family member." Chloe lifted her head at that, her face crumpling again. I did not ask permission before I spoke. "He did not help Chloe start strong," I said. "He emptied everyone and disappeared." Dad's jaw tightened. He said they knew that now. He said they were still trying to understand the extent of it all. He said the bank was reviewing what could be recovered and what could not. He said the police were taking a report, but that no one expected Miles to be found quickly. Then Mom turned toward me, her eyes pleading. "Avery, you are the successful one," she said. "You have a good job. You understand banks and contracts. You have always been the stable one. We need you to help your sister." The weight of that sentence settled on me hard. I felt it press into my shoulders, like hands pushing me down into a role I had worn my whole life. "Help how?" I asked. Dad finally looked straight at me. "We need you to step in," he said. "We need you to make things right. Chloe has nothing left. Your mom and I are wiped out. You are the only one who still has resources." There it was. The unspoken expectation finally gave words. The way it had always gone in this family, dressed up now as a necessity. Mom reached for my hand. "Your sister made a mistake," she said, "but she needs you. You are her older sister." This is when the family pulls together. Something hot and sharp flared in my chest. I thought of the door closing the night before the wedding, of the words "only real family," of the cheap haul and the fast-moving envelopes, of the email on my coffee table, of Chloe repeating Miles's lines about smart couples and wasted flowers. I pulled my hand back, gently but firmly. "I did help," I said. "I tried to help, and I was pushed out." Dad's face darkened. "This is not the time to hold on to hurt feelings." "These are not hurt feelings," I said. "These are consequences." The room shifted. Chloe started crying again, this time louder. Mom moved back to her side quickly. shooting me a look that was half fear and half reproach. "We did not ask you to give all that money to Miles," Dad said. "You chose to be generous." I felt my breath hitch. "And you chose to give him $95,000 from your house and $180,000 from your retirement," I said. "We all made choices. The difference is, I was cut out of the truth, while you kept listening to his voice." Mom looked startled. "He was protecting Chloe from being pressured," she said weakly. "He said that big weddings were outdated now, that minimalist weddings were modern. He said you liked extravagant things, and that you might try to push her into something she did not want." The words sank in slowly. Suddenly, I could see it clearly. Miles had not only reshaped Chloe's thinking, he had reshaped the family's view of me. He had turned my absence from the wedding into a narrative of taste and jealousy. He had planted the idea that I might interfere rather than support. That was why the wedding had stayed small. That was why no one questioned it. That was why I was kept at a distance without explanation. I felt the full, cold weight of it settle into place. "So he made me the problem," I said quietly. No one answered that directly. David exhaled hard and rubbed his face with both hands. "We are simply saying that you are the only one who can help us recover from this," he said when he looked up again. "You understand all of this better than we do. And if I cannot fix it," I asked, "if the money is gone, if the banks cannot reverse it, then what?" Mom's mouth trembled. "Then we will have nothing," she whispered. For a moment, the familiar reflex surged up in me, the old willingness to absorb everything for the sake of peace. The instinct that said I should shoulder this too, like I always had. I felt it tighten in my chest like a cord pulling me forward. Then something else rose to meet it. I thought of Chloe repeating Miles's words. I thought of the email timed to the event. I thought of the way the envelopes had vanished into that paper bag. I thought of the phrase, "only real family," and how easily it had pushed me aside when it was convenient. And for the first time in my life, I did not bend. "I am not your emergency fund," I said. The words landed like a dropped glass. David stared at me. Mom looked as if I had struck her. Chloe lifted her head, stunned. "I am willing to help you understand what happened and what your options are," I continued. "I will help you talk to the bank. I will help you document what Miles did. I will help you protect what little might be left. But I will not replace the money he stole. That is not my responsibility." Cole's face twisted. "How can you say that?" she cried. "He took everything." "He took everything from all of us," I said, "including me." Mom shook her head as if trying to shake the words loose. "We raised you better than this," she said. "You raised me to be responsible," I replied, "not to be endlessly used." Dad took a step toward me but then stopped. The room felt tight with emotion, every breath heavy. "You are abandoning us when we need you most," Mom said softly. The accusation cut, but it did not break me. "I am refusing to let Miles destroy me too," I said. "There is a difference." No one spoke for a long time. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence again. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. Life going on without permission. Finally, Dad turned away and sank into his chair. He looked smaller there than I had ever seen him. Mom continued to stroke Chloe's hair. Chloe stared at the floor. I stood up slowly. "I will come back when you are ready to talk about facts instead of blame," I said. "When you are ready to look at what Miles actually did, instead of trying to make it my job to absorb the fallout." No one stopped me this time. As I stepped out into the bright Glendale afternoon again, the weight inside me felt different than it had the day before. Still heavy, but firmer, like something newly set. For the first time in this whole unraveling, I had drawn a line. And I could feel, even then, that everything was about to change again. The next morning began with another knock at my door, but this one carried a different weight. Not frantic, not rushed. 3 firm raps that echoed through my condo and pulled me from thin restless sleep. For a moment I lay still, staring at the ceiling, wishing it was a delivery or a neighbor with the wrong apartment. Then memory rushed in and erased the hope. I pulled on jeans and a sweater, smoothed my hair back, and checked the peephole. It was Dad. He looked older than he had the day before. His shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen growing up. When I opened the door, he did not bother with greetings. "Chloe needs you at the house. The police are there. A detective." The word detective sounded foreign in his mouth. My stomach tightened as I grabbed my bag and followed him to the car. On the drive to Glendale, he explained in broken phrases that the department had assigned financial crimes to the case. That account had surfaced, accounts none of us had known existed. By the time we turned onto the street, my heart was racing. A plain dark sedan sat parked in front of my parents' house, quiet and official, without a single marking. Inside, the living room felt crowded and tense. Chloe sat curled on the couch in leggings and an oversized sweatshirt, her hair pulled into a loose knot that had clearly come undone over hours of panic. Mom sat beside her, tissues already crushed in her hands. A man in a dark suit stood near the coffee table with a notepad, still and watchful. Dad introduced him as Detective Dean Kessler. The detective nodded and motioned for me to sit. He explained that they had traced the international transfer from the joint account. In doing so, they had uncovered several business entities created over the past 2 years. Shell companies, single-member companies with no real operations, only money moving through them. All of them were under Chloe's name. The color drained from Chloe's face. She shook her head hard. "I never opened any companies. I do not even know how." The detective listened, and then stated calmly that, on paper, she was listed as the registered officer and owner. The companies had received funds from multiple sources: the joint account, the home equity line of credit, the retirement transfers. Mom pressed her hand to her chest. Dad swore under his breath. The detective said that the person whose name appeared on the documents was treated as the primary suspect until evidence pointed otherwise. Chloe looked at me in desperation. "Tell him I do not know anything about this." I told the detective the truth. That Chloe worked administrative jobs. That she forgot parking tickets. That she was not the mastermind of a shell operation. He wrote something down, but gave no reaction. Then he explained the next steps. Chloe would need to surrender her laptop and phone for forensic review. Financial documents related to miles, wedding expenses, and family loans would be collected. He asked if there were physical files in the house. Mom rushed to the bedroom for the folder. Dad followed. The detective told Chloe she was not under arrest, but she was considered a person of interest. He advised her to retain legal counsel before discussing anything financial with anyone. She laughed weakly and said she had no money for a lawyer. The detective said that was a family matter. That was when the room shifted. Dad returned with the thick folder and placed it on the table like a confession. As the detective flipped through the pages, Dad turned to me. He said Chloe needed legal protection, that lawyers cost money. The retainers were expensive. Then he said I was good with money. Mom slid beside Chloe and took her hand. She told me that Chloe could go to prison if this went wrong, that a good lawyer could be the difference between charges and freedom. She said I felt exhausted in the marrow of my bones. I asked how much the retainer was likely to be. Dad told me it was enough to hit hard without being impossible. Enough. I thought of the $20,000 I had already sent, the unused dress in my closet, the home equity line, the retirement fund, the way my limits had been ignored. I told them I would not pay the retainer. Mom blinked. Dad stiffened. Chloe stared. I said I would help them find lawyers. I would sit in meetings. I would organize documents. I would do everything except write another check. Mom broke into real sobbing and accused me of turning my back on my sister. She said Chloe would help me if the roles were reversed. I said I was done paying for decisions I had not been allowed to make. The detective watched in quiet restraint. Then he collected Chloe's devices. She unplugged her laptop with shaking hands and placed her phone on the table. He labeled both and sealed them into a padded bag. After he left, the house felt hollow. Dad muttered that it was a nightmare. Mom blamed Miles. Chloe whispered she wished she could disappear. Then there was another knock. It was Aunt Marion. She entered with focused calm, hugged Mom briefly, touched Chloe's shoulder, and got straight to the paperwork. She examined everything without speaking. Then she paused at one document. She asked Chloe if she recognized the signature. Chloe said no. Marion compared it to an old medical form Dad brought out. The difference was immediate. The new signature was smooth and rounded. Chloe's true handwriting leaned forward and climbed uphill. "That is not my signature," Chloe said. Marion nodded. "Someone forged this." The room fell silent. For the first time since the detective arrived, I felt oxygen return to my lungs. Because forgery did not just mean deeper fraud. It meant the paper trail might not fully bind Chloe the way Miles intended. It meant my sister had been used as a shield. And for the first time, I knew the investigation might not end the way it began. I realized that the story the detective had walked in with might not be the story he walked out with in the end. The days that followed felt suspended between motion and stillness. No sirens, no sudden knocks, just phone calls, emails, quiet confirmations that something large was unfolding, far beyond what we could see. It was like standing inside a sealed room while pressure built behind them. Walls. Marion called me on Thursday morning and told me to come to her house. Her bungalow smelled like coffee and warm spice when I stepped inside. The dining table was covered in papers, laid out in clean, deliberate stacks. Bank statements, registration forms, screenshots. She had arranged everything the way she always did. Order against chaos. She pointed me to a chair and slid the first stack toward me. On top was a copy of Chloe's driver's license. Under it were business registration forms. "Look at the corners," Marion said. Tiny print listed dates, times, and internet protocol addresses. 3 locations had been used to open accounts in Chloe's name. My parents' house, Chloe's apartment, and a co-working space downtown that none of us had ever known her to visit. If she was doing this herself, Marion said, why use a location she has never been to? The answer made my stomach tighten. Someone else had been using her identity. The next stack showed signatures. They looked close at a glance. The same slant, the same general shape. But when I studied them beside older samples, the truth revealed itself. These new ones lacked the small, natural inconsistencies of real handwriting. The tails repeated too exactly. The pressure stayed unnaturally even. They were copies, not originals. Then came the transfer logs. Money had been routed out of my parents' retirement fund into shell companies under Chloe's name. The home equity line of credit flowed into another. The joint account Chloe shared with Miles sent consistent transfers to business accounts she supposedly controlled. Each transaction was authorized by Chloe's login credentials, her username, her password, her verification codes. The same login Miles had once set up for her on my parents' couch while she laughed that she never remembered which letters went where. On paper, everything still pointed at her. Then Marion showed me the location data. On the day one of the companies was registered in person at a state filing office, Chloe's phone location placed her at that exact building for nearly an hour. The corporate record listed her as present. Even a masked figure on security footage walked up to the counter in her name. But I remembered that day. She was with me. We had been walking through a downtown craft fair, eating jam samples, laughing when she spilled iced tea on her shirt. I still had the photo of us in front of the mural. The timestamp matched the location log exactly. Chloe could not have been in 2 places at once, but her phone could. Miles had borrowed it that morning to stream a game in the car while we drove. If he had her phone, he had her identity. Every code, every confirmation. Marion nodded slowly. So he made it look like she was at the filing office while she was actually walking with you. Each record pointed to Chloe at first glance. But once you lifted your eyes from the printed line and remembered real life, the story split open. We sat surrounded by paperwork, earning every page like a fragile but dangerous object. The deeper we went, the clearer it became how deliberately she had been positioned as the front of everything. That afternoon, the phone rang. Detective Kessler informed us that the Federal Financial Crimes Unit had requested the full file. Similar shell structures, similar timing, similar financial patterns in other states. This was not isolated. Marion muttered that Miles had been busy. The idea that this nightmare stretched far beyond our family made everything feel colder and oddly less personal at the same time. On the drive home, I called Tessa. She listened quietly as I told her about the location data, the copied signatures, and the federal investigation. Then she hesitated. She reminded me of seeing Chloe and Miles at a coffee shop weeks before the wedding. Chloe had carried a thick stack of papers. Miles pointed where she should sign. He told her they were vendor contracts for the wedding. Chloe had signed again and again without reading, trusting him with the boring stuff. Tessa said that Miles watched each signature like money being placed into his hand. The image landed painfully clear. My sister in a cheerful cafe signed away her own identity while thinking she was just approving playlists and catering. When I got home, the email printout slid from my bag onto the car seat. Funds will be ready after the event. Now those words aligned with everything we had uncovered. The evidence still pointed outward to the same person. To the banks. To the computers. To the logs. It was Chloe, and we were going to have to fight every layer of machinery built into these systems to show that the life written in files and codes was never the life she had actually lived. And standing there in the driveway, with a foreclosure warning inside and storm clouds gathering overhead, I understood in a way I never had before that I could not be both. The collapse did not happen all at once. It came in waves, each one heavier than the last. The foreclosure notice arrived first, slipped into the mailbox like an ordinary piece of mail. Thin paper carrying an outsized thread. Mom found it that afternoon and sat at the kitchen table for almost an hour before she even opened it. When she finally did, her hands shook so violently that the paper quivered. David said the word foreclosure slowly, like he was testing whether it was real. He stared at the numbers as if he could argue them into disappearing. He had worked his entire life to keep that house. Every payment, every repair, every year of certainty. One man and one decision had undone all of it in months. Chloe barely reacted. She just stared at the floor and whispered that it was all her fault. No one contradicted her, not because it was true, but because none of us had the energy to argue anymore. 2 days later, her notice arrived. It was official, printed on stark white paper with legal language that made everything feel colder. The state gave her 30 days to respond to allegations tied to the shell companies in her name. 30 days to explain why money flowed the way it did. 30 days before that notice could turn into something with cuffs and courtrooms attached. She read it over and over, like the meaning might soften with repetition. That word, suspect, sliced deeper than any other. She clutched the pages to her chest like they were both poison and shield. "I do not know what I am supposed to say," she told me that night. I did not even understand half the papers he put in front of me. The mess did not stay contained in Glendale. At work, my supervisor and someone from Human Resources called me into a conference room. They showed me a small local news article that mentioned the investigation in careful, general terms. No full names yet. Just enough detail for anyone with patience to trace the connections. My name appeared as a relative tied to the situation, a professional in a related field. A potential conflict. They assured me I was not under investigation, but they also told me that optics mattered, that clients could be skittish, that while no action was being taken against me yet, my accounts and assignments might be reassigned temporarily. I walked back to my desk feeling like the floor beneath my life had thinned to paper. That same evening, I drove back to my parents' house. No one had called me. No one had asked. The crisis simply pulled me back like gravity. The atmosphere inside was heavy and dim. Curtains half drawn, television murmuring without anyone really watching it. Dad sat at the table with a legal pad full of numbers. Mom moved dishes around without cleaning them. Chloe sat bundled in a blanket, her notice spread on the coffee table like a disease map. Dad told me the mortgage company was moving forward. They could delay the process maybe if a payment plan was negotiated. That would require cash they simply did not have. Mom looked at me when she said that, and then she said quietly that maybe if I had been more understanding with Chloe from the beginning, none of this would have escalated the way it did. If I had not created distance, if I had not questioned Miles, maybe he would not have felt trapped. It was one of the strangest moments of my life. To hear a grown woman, my own mom, suggest that a man who vanished with hundreds of thousands of dollars might have done so because I was difficult. Dad cut in firmly and told her to stop. He said that he signed those loan papers with his own hand. He said that he had believed Miles because he wanted to believe that Chloe was safe. He said that mistake was his. Mom fell silent but did not soften. Later, when the conversation turned to solutions, it landed where I knew it would. Dad talked about legal fees, about emergency payments, about saving the house, about Chloe needing protection and representation, about how I had always been the steady one. Mom said that families pull together in emergencies. Chloe said nothing, but she did not need to. They were all looking at me. I told them again what I had already told them before, that I would help with documents, with meetings, with phone calls, with understanding the words no one else wanted to read. But I would not give them my savings. I would not underwrite another disaster. I would not turn myself into their last line of credit. Mom cried. Dad shut down. Chloe dissolved into quiet tears. And still, I did not move. The wedge had already formed. I could not pretend it had not. Later that night, as the tension throbbed in the house like a headache that never quite breaks, Chloe said something small that landed like a confession. She said that Miles had warned her about me. She said that he told her I would ruin the wedding energy if I found out how tight they were keeping the budget, that I would bring my big wedding ideas and pressure them, that I would judge them for being smart with money. She said he told her not to invite me for that reason. The words felt distant and sharp at the same time. So that was it. The real reason I had not stood in that room with the sagging balloons, the reason I had been labeled before I could speak, the reason I had been made into the enemy of a story that had never been mine. He had built a narrative where I was wasteful and controlling, where he was wise and protective. And it worked. Maintainer listening to her, I realized that he had not only robbed their accounts, he had robbed me of my place. The argument that followed did not explode. It burned low and hot. Dad took responsibility for trusting Miles. Mom kept reaching for reasons that did not hurt as much as betrayal. Chloe hovered between guilt and denial. Eventually, I stood again. I said I would return for meetings and documents. I said I would attend any hearings. I said I would sit beside Chloe when she had to answer questions that made her feel small. But I would not live inside this storm. Dad nodded slowly. Mom did not respond. Chloe just watched me go. On the porch, the sky was dull and heavy, the kind of gray that presses down on everything without threatening rain. The yard looked the same. The house looked the same, but I did not feel the same. As I placed my hand on the car door, I finally admitted what had been forming inside me since the night I was told. The only real family had been invited. To them, I was not their daughter first. I was their backup plan. And once that truth settled whole inside my chest, I knew I could never go back to being useful in the same way again. That realization sat with me like a weight in my chest for the next few days. It did not make anything easier. It just made the lines clearer. Every time my phone lit up with my parents' number or Chloe's name, I had to decide where I ended and where their emergencies began. On a gray Monday morning, Marian called again. Her voice had that clipped steadiness that told me she was holding something heavy and did not want to drop it over the phone. She said we needed to meet. She said we were done just reacting. It was time to decide how we were going to protect Chloe on paper, not just in our hearts. We met at her bungalow. The day felt muted, as if the sky had been rubbed down to a dull eraser color. Inside, her dining table looked like a small war room. Stacks of documents, labeled envelopes, a legal pad filled with tight handwriting, 2 mugs already waiting, coffee steaming quietly. I sat down and wrapped my hands around the warm mug, even though I was not thirsty. "All right," I said. "Where are we?" Marian tapped one stack. "We start with what the government cares about," she said. "Metadata." She said the word slowly, like she was tasting it. Times. Dates. Internet locations. Little crumbs that computers leave behind. She showed me the login records again. Different internet addresses. Ones that lined up with my parents' house. Chloe's apartment. That co-working space across town. Then she showed me something I had not noticed before. The timestamps on some of those online filings overlapped with times when Chloe could not possibly have been the one sitting at a keyboard. "You remember that weekend in Sedona?" she asked. I did. Bright red rocks, that small inn with the scratchy towels and good coffee. Chloe sat on the balcony with her feet tucked under her, telling me she was finally relaxing for the first time in months. We hiked a little and laughed a lot and ate too much food from that taco place with the long line. Marion slid a printed screen toward me. It showed a scanned image of Chloe's driver license attached to an online form. At the bottom, in tiny black letters, was a timestamp from that same weekend. Not just the same weekend, almost the same hour I remembered us trying to take a selfie with a ridiculous rock in the background. "You were with her that day," Marion said. "Right." I nodded slowly. We had been in Arizona. Her phone log and my photo roll would both show it. "Then who uploaded this?" Marion asked. My stomach turned. It had to be Miles. He would have had a copy of her identification. He would have had internet access. And he would have had the time and privacy, while she was more than a state away. "So that document that makes it look like Chloe is personally applying," Marion said, "was actually likely scanned and submitted by him while she was out of town." She kept going. "Metadata, it just records. And if we can line up those records with where Chloe actually was, we can the federal people will care about that." It was the first time in a long stretch of weeks that I felt something like hope creep in that did not immediately burn my throat on the way back out. "So we have signatures that look copied, scans uploaded when she was with me in another state." Marion nodded. "All of that can go into a legal response," she said. "If we package it correctly, it does not just say she is innocent, it shows how someone else used her." I let that settle. It meant making sure the story on the page matched what had actually happened. We spent the next few hours building a rough outline. What Chloe remembered, what could be backed up by records, what gaps still existed. Marion made notes about the state notice, about the 30-day window, about how we might structure a narrative that demonstrated fraud without accidentally incriminating her. By early afternoon, my brain felt fogged. I pushed my chair back and rubbed the bridge of my nose. "We are going to need an attorney who actually understands this stuff," I said. "Someone who has dealt with identity misuse, not just simple theft." Marion agreed. She had already started a list. Most of the names came with numbers attached that made my throat tighten. Retainers that sounded like rent payments, not meeting fees. Before we could get further, my phone buzzed. It was Mom. The third time she had called that day. I answered because ignoring her completely did not feel right, no matter how angry I still was. "Where are you?" she asked. Her voice was raw and edgy. "At Marion's," I said. "We are working on Chloe's response." "You should be here," Mom said. "Your sister needs you. We need you." I told her calmly that helping from Marion's table was still helping. That just being in the same room with their fear did not add any value. There was a pause. Then Mom did something I did not expect. She asked if I could come by the house later that evening. She said she wanted to talk face to face. I was tired. I knew what that tone meant, but I also knew that if there were lines to draw, I wanted to draw them on my terms, not hers. So after leaving Marion's, I drove back to Glendale. Again. The house felt different when I walked in. More desperate. Less angry. The foreclosure notice was now magneted to the side of the refrigerator, as if keeping it visible might keep time from passing. Cole sat at the table with a cup of tea she was not drinking. Dad was in his chair, staring at nothing. Mom stood when she saw me. Her eyes were swollen, and there was a hollow look around her mouth I did not recognize. She walked around the table slowly and stopped right in front of me. For a heartbeat, I thought she was going to hug me. Instead, she dropped to her knees. The movement was so sudden, I actually reached out on instinct, afraid she had fallen. But she had done it on purpose. She clasped her hands together like some old painting of a woman praying. She said that I had to save this family. Her voice shook and the words came fast. She said I was the only one who could. That I was smart enough. That I had always been the strong one. She said that if I turned away now, everything would collapse. The house, Cole's future. Their retirement. All of it. I stood there, frozen, looking down at my own mother, kneeling on the scuffed linoleum of her kitchen, like she was in a church. Dad watched, his face gray. Chloe stared with wide, horrified eyes. I felt something inside me that had been soft for a very long time straighten itself. I asked her gently to stand up. She shook her head and kept pleading. I bent down so I could look her in the eyes. I told her that I loved her, that I loved this family in ways they did not always see, that I would do everything I could to help keep Chloe from being swallowed up by a story that was not entirely hers. But I would not pay another debt. Not for the house, not for the loans, not for anything that had my parents' signatures on it, not for anything Miles had touched. Mom stared at me like she did not understand the words. Then she said that money was just money, that I could make it back, that she and Dad could not. I said quietly that this was not about math. It was about me choosing not to vanish inside their problems. I told her that their signatures were theirs. Their loans were theirs. Their trust in Miles was theirs. I could not erase that. Dad finally moved. He put a hand on Mom's shoulder and told her to get up. His voice cracked as he said it. She resisted for a second, then let him help her back into her chair. She would not look at me. Chloe whispered that she never wanted things to get like this, that she had just wanted to be happy. I believed her. That was the worst part. I sat down at the table and told them what Marian and I had found. The mismatched login information, the suspicious internet addresses, the signatures that looked copied rather than written, the scans submitted when Chloe was in another state with me. Dad frowned in concentration. Even Mom's expression shifted, just a little, from accusation to something closer to fear. So there is a chance they will see that he set her up, Dad said. There is a chance, I said. If we present it right, and if we get someone competent to argue it, Mom latched onto that. Then you have to find that person, she said, and you have to pay for them. What good is all of this evidence if we cannot afford someone to explain it? I took a breath. I told her again that I would help collect information. I would help organize documents. I would sit in meetings, take notes, and translate legal language. I would fight like hell to make sure Chloe's story was told accurately. But I would not write any more checks. There was a long, painful silence. Dad rubbed his face with both hands. He said he wished they had listened to me earlier. He said he knew this was not fair, that expecting me to fix their money while mine was supposed to remain untouched was not logical, that he had made decisions a grown man should have known better than to make. Mom's shoulders slumped. She said softly that she did not know how to stop seeing me as the one who saved the day, that from the moment I got my first real job, it had felt like the universe had finally sent them a safety net. She admitted that part of her had leaned on that too hard. It was the closest she had come to an apology. It did not undo anything, but it mattered. We went around in quiet circles after that. Fear, regret, blame that flared and faded. None of it changed the foreclosure letter on the refrigerator or the state notice on the table. Later that night, back at Marian's, we went through one more batch of digital records the detective had shared. Hidden deep in a set of logs from a document scanning service was another clue. Files attached to one of Chloe's supposed companies had been scanned from a specific device. The technical description did not mean much to me at first. Marian pointed out the device identifier and the time. It matched the same Sedona weekend. Same hour, same overlapping window as the photo of Chloe squinting into the Arizona sun beside me. Only this log was different. It did not just show when the document had been created. It showed the exact machine that had sent it. A machine that did not line up with any device in my parents' house or Chloe's apartment. So while we were standing on Red Rock taking silly pictures, Marian said he was at some scanner somewhere feeding your sister's life into a system she did not even know existed. She circled the identifier with her pen. This, she said, is what separate lives look like on paper. For a moment, I just stared at that line of numbers and letters. It was so small, so neutral. No motives, no heartbreak, just data. And yet, it drew a clear line between Chloe's actual life and the story Miles had been writing for her. I felt a strange steadiness settle over me. I could not pay their way out of this, but maybe, just maybe, I could help write a different ending than the one he had planned. For a moment, I just stared at that line of numbers and letters on Marion's screen. It was so small, so neutral, and yet it drew a clear line between the life Chloe had actually lived and the one Miles had been secretly building in her name. I did not know yet how quickly that line would turn into the first real break in his wall. It was only a few days later when Marion called me again. This time she did not sound cautious or measured. She sounded energized in that quiet, dangerous way that meant something, finally, made sense. She told me the police had sent over new footage, security video they had pulled from a gas station outside Flagstaff along the route Miles likely took during the same stretch we had been in, Arizona. I drove to her house with my hands trembling on the steering wheel. When I arrived, Marion already had the video queued up on her television. The room was dim except for the glow of the screen. She told me to sit before I even set my bag down. The footage was grainy. Fluorescent lights. A narrow aisle between snack racks. A timestamp in the corner, marking late evening during the same week Chloe and I had been in Sedona. The door swung open, and a man walked in alone. Even before his face turned toward the camera, I knew it was Miles. The loose confidence in his posture, the way he rolled his shoulders as if he owned whatever room he entered. He carried a folder under his arm. He walked straight to the small scanner beside the counter, exchanged a few words with the clerk, and fed cash across the surface. Then he pulled the stack of papers from the folder and began scanning them one by one. Slow, careful, focused. At one point, he lifted a page higher than he meant to. The header was unmistakable. It was one of the operating agreements we had seen in Chloe's file. He scanned every page himself. No Chloe. No hesitation. No shared process. Just Miles feeding Chloe's future into a machine at a lonely roadside gas station. When the video stopped, Marion did not speak. Neither did I. We both already knew what this meant. Within 48 hours, the detective confirmed the change. Chloe's status shifted from the suspect to the victim witness. It did not erase the mess. It did not restore the stolen money. It did not dissolve the notices pinned to the walls, but it changed everything about how the system saw her. When I told Chloe, her knees buckled and she had to sit down. She covered her face with both hands and sobbed in a way I had not heard since. We were children, and she scraped both elbows falling off her bike. Adam stood frozen in the kitchen doorway. Mom cried quietly into a towel pressed against her mouth. For the first time since Miles disappeared, there was no argument in the room about what had really happened. The police now agreed. He had used her. The calm lasted less than a week. The next payment on the home equity line came due. David covered the table in numbers again. Pension, bills, insurance, minimum payments, shortfalls. Everything pointed to the same answer. They could not make the payment. The bank offered only a narrow grace window. The word foreclosure moved closer again. When I walked into the house that night, I felt the shift immediately. The hope from the police update had already thinned under the weight of real deadlines. Mom stepped toward me before I even set my bag down. Now that they know Chloe is a victim, she said, this will all change. The bank will have to work with us, but we just need to get through this month. David did not look at me. He stared at the numbers on the page in front of him like they were written in another language. Chloe sat curled into the corner of the couch, her fingers twisting the same loose thread over and over. They did not use the word ask. They did not need to. Every face in that room was pointed at me. For a second, the old instinct flared again. The urge to solve, to stabilize, to throw my body in front of the collision and absorb it for everyone. Then I thought about my mother on her knees, about being blamed when it felt convenient, about being needed only when the ground gave way. I said that I was grateful the police finally saw the truth. I said I would continue attending every meeting, every interview, every legal address Chloe had to survive. Then I told them I would not pay the home equity line. Not now, not later, not ever. The words dropped heavy and final between us. Mom began crying immediately. She said this was different now, that they were not protecting a criminal anymore, that I was choosing money over the house I grew up in. David said my name once, low and strained. I stood still. I said that they were adults when they signed those documents. I said that loving them did not require me to erase the consequences of those choices. I said that I had already given what I could without disappearing inside their emergency. I said that their house was not my obligation. The room went quiet in a way that hurt my ears. Dad finally nodded, not in agreement, but in understanding that the argument was over. Mom would not look at me. Chloe whispered that she never thought it would come to this. Neither had I. Outside, the world kept moving. A dog barked. Tires rolled past. Darkness slid slowly across the yard. I stood there with guilt and grief pulling at me from every direction, and still did not move. For the first time in my life, I had held a boundary where everything inside me begged to collapse it, and I knew that nothing between us would ever be simple again. I drove home that night with my hands steady on the wheel and my heart anything but steady. I had said no, out loud, in the house where I had learned to say yes to everybody but myself. The words still echoed in my chest all the way back to my condo. The next few days were quieter on the surface, but I could feel the distance that had opened up. Fewer calls, shorter messages. No one said they were angry. They did not have to. Silence has its own temperature. A week later, I was the one who asked for a meeting. I sent a single text to the family group thread, the same thread that had once been used for birthday pictures and holiday plans. I told them I wanted to talk. Just the four of us. No cousins, no aunts, no neighbors listening from their yards. Dad replied first and said they would be home. Chloe sent a heart, then deleted it, then finally just wrote, "Okay." Mom did not respond at all. The afternoon I went back to Glendale. The sky was pale and hazy over the neighborhood. The house looked smaller than it used to, as if it already knew it was losing its position as the center of everything. I parked at the curb and sat for a moment in the car, both hands on the steering wheel, telling myself that I was not walking into a fight. I was walking into a boundary. When I stepped inside, they were all already in the living room. Chloe, hands clasped around a mug she did not seem to notice had gone cold. David in his chair, elbows on his knees, fingers laced. Mom in her usual spot at the end of the sofa, back straight, face set. I stayed standing for a moment, then took the chair opposite them. My heart was beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat, but my voice, when it came, sounded steady. I told them I had made some decisions. Not about them, exactly. About me. First, I said I had spoken with Marion and with a lawyer she had found, who specialized in financial crimes and identity abuse. Marion had agreed to act as the point person to protect Chloe, to help gather documents, to work with the attorney, to keep track of deadlines. I said I would help. I would go to meetings. I would testify if needed. I would stand beside my sister in any room where she was treated like a file. Instead, both Chloe and Dad looked relieved in a way that had nothing to do with money. Then I told them the other parts. I said I was not going to fix their finances. Not anymore. Not in small ways or large ones. I said I would not pay the home equity line. I would not replace retirement losses. I would not write checks that turned my life into a permanent damage control fund. There was no anger in my voice, just a tired kind of clarity. Chloe's eyes filled instantly. She set the mug down so hard it sloshed. "You are really done," she whispered. I nodded. I said I loved her, that nothing would change that. But that love did not mean I had to keep lying to myself about what I could carry. Dad looked at the carpet and exhaled slowly. "You should not have had to do it in the first place," he said. "That is on us." Mom stayed silent. She watched me with that measuring look she used when I was a teenager coming home past curfew, trying to decide on a punishment. Only this time, she had no leverage left. Last, I told them something I had not been able to fully say before. I said I was going to live differently now. I said I was done twisting myself into a shape that fit whatever they needed, in the moment. I said that from now on, I would be in their lives on terms that did not require me to disappear. I would visit. I would call. I would help within limits we agreed on. But I would not be manipulated, guilted, or begged into giving up the life I had built for myself. The room felt very still. Chloe was the first one to respond. She started crying in that hiccuping way she used to when we were little, and she had done something wrong, but did not know how to fix it. She said she had been awful to me, that she had believed Miles when he told her I was critical and controlling, that she had repeated his words like they were her own, that she had chosen him over me, without even realizing that is what she was doing. She said she was sorry, not in the quick way people say it to end a conversation, but slowly, like the word was something heavy she had to lift. I felt my throat tighten. That apology did not erase what had happened, but it mattered more than she knew. Dad cleared his throat and said he was grateful. For what I had done, for what I was still willing to do, for the way I had kept track of the evidence when no one else could think straight. He did not ask for money. Not this time. He thanked me instead. Mom said nothing. She did not argue. She did not plead. She simply went quiet in her corner of the couch and looked at me with a kind of shocked distance, as if she were seeing her oldest child for the first time as something other than an extension of herself. Losing control can sound dramatic, but sometimes it looks exactly like that. A woman who has always run the emotional temperature of the house suddenly realizes the thermostat is no longer in her hand. We did not hug at the end of that conversation. We did not slam doors either. When I left, it was with a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Something had ended. Something else, still nameless, had begun. 6 months is not long in the life of a family, but it is long enough for everything to look different on the surface. Chloe sat in a small courtroom on a warm morning in late summer, hands folded tightly in her lap. The case file was now thick, padded with documents Marion had chased down and neatly labeled, with expert reports on forged signatures, with location logs from Sedona and security footage from the gas station in Flagstaff. The prosecutor spoke. The defense attorney spoke. The judge read through the agreed statements with an expression that stayed neutral. But his decision did not. Chloe was formally cleared. Not just no charges, official recognition that she had been used as a tool in a larger fraud. She was not the architect. She was one of the casualties. When the words came, her shoulders sagged. I felt my own lungs expand as if I had been holding my breath for half a year without realizing it. Outside the courthouse, she turned to me with tears on her face and laughed a short, shaky laugh that sounded closer to the girl I used to know. I am still broke, she said, but at least I am not a criminal. It was a start. Dad and Mom sold the house. There were no miracles from the bank. No 11th hour reprieve. The home equity line had to be paid. The fastest way out was to let go of the place they had spent so long holding onto. They moved into a modest apartment complex a few miles away. First floor, no yard, but a small balcony where Mom put 2 plastic chairs and a single potted plant. Dad grumbled about the thin walls, then admitted quietly that it was a relief to have fewer things to maintain. There was grief in that move. You do not pack up an entire lifetime without feeling something crack. But there was also a strange kind of leveling. Without the house as the center of gravity, we met each other in smaller, more neutral spaces. A coffee shop, a park bench, their new kitchen that did not have my childhood etched into every corner. I moved too. After years of commuting back and forth, of being half anchored in Glendale and half in the city, I accepted an offer that had been hovering in the air for a while. A promotion and a transfer to the Phoenix office. New responsibilities, new colleagues, a fresh start that was not built around being on call for everybody else. I found a condo in Phoenix that had good light and a small balcony of its own. When I signed the papers, I thought about how many documents had been signed without Chloe understanding. I read every line twice. The place was not huge. It did not need to be. It was mine. Work stabilized. The article that had once caused concern faded back into the noise of the internet. The fact that I had stayed on the right side of the law, even while my family was tangled in it, ended up turning into a quiet mark in my favor. I took on new clients, led a few bigger projects, and started to feel something I had not in a long time, pride that was just for me. As for Miles, he remained as missing as ever. There were rumors through the investigation channels. Occasional hints that someone who matched his description had opened an account here or rented a room there. Nothing stuck long enough to turn into an arrest. Sometimes I would catch myself wondering if he ever thought about us. About the house that had to be sold. About the woman whose life he had almost wrecked. Then I would stop myself. Some people do not deserve the rent those thoughts charge to stay in your mind. My relationship with my family did not heal into some glossy version of what it might look like from the outside. It became something else. With Chloe, there were lunches in small diners and long text threads at night. She started therapy. She took a job that paid less but was gentler on her mind. We talked. She apologized again, not because I demanded it, but because she wanted to. With Dad, there were quieter conversations, more listening, soft acknowledgments that he had been wrong to dismiss my concerns about Miles. He did not expect me to fix things anymore. Sometimes we just talked about sports or retirement plans that looked very different now. There was humility in him that I had not seen in a long time. With Mom, it was slower. She never sat me down and said, "I am sorry." That was not who she had ever been. But she stopped asking for money. She stopped using words like selfish and jealous. When she wanted to see me, she asked rather than assumed. That may not sound like much. To me, it felt like a small, respectful revolution. I visited their apartment as a guest, not as unpaid staff. I left when I needed to. I answered the phone when I could. I let messages sit when I could not. The world did not end. 6 months after everything had blown apart, I sat on my own balcony in Phoenix as the sun folded itself down behind the buildings. The evening air was warm, but not unbearable. A glass of water sweated on the table beside me. The city noises below blended into a soft hum. I thought about the girl who had stood outside a wedding she had not been invited to, scrolling through pictures of cheap balloons and fake smiles. I thought about the woman I had become in the months between then and now. Family used to mean one thing to me: the people who raised you, the people whose names are on your birth certificate, the people whose emergencies automatically outrank your own needs. Now it meant something more complicated and, in its own way, kinder. Family, I had learned, is not just blood. Family is the people who do not treat you like a tool, the ones who can hear no and still come back with love rather than punishment, the ones who see you as a person, not just as a solution. Saint there in the warm Phoenix twilight, I let that truth settle in my bones. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.